A quick note before we hop into today's video. During my sets today in the Go Battle League, honestly I had a very negative experience with the new system. I was consistently starting every battle between 1 to 3 turns late, and obviously that's a pretty big difference maker, so it made it difficult to get quality footage. Now the good news is we did have a member of the community, BZPH, submit footage, so we still do get a video today. And today we're going to be checking out the newly released Shadow Shiny Dewgong. Now, I never even got a good IV Shadow Dewgong, so the fact that this trader got a good IV Shadow Shiny Dewgong is incredibly fortunate. So, without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we see a pretty decent lead in the first match, Shadow Ampharos into Shadow A/. Now, much like yesterday's video, this is another triple Shadow team, Shadow Ampharos as the lead, the newly released Shadow Corviknight as the save switch, and that Shadow Shiny Dewgong as the closer. Ampharos shields the first, banks a ton of energy, and then goes for the catch onto Corviknight. Was the opponent able to react in time? They were not. That's going to be a drill run catch, and the A/ does not pivot out. Corviknight able to outpace here, 9-turn pacing versus 10. Air Cutter will be getting the shield back. Sand Slash stays in to fire off Ice Punch. Shadow Ice Punch will do a lot of damage onto Corviknight, but Corviknight should be able to hang on. Opponent aggressive pivots out, sending in the Fearow, hoping for the farm down, but they're not quite able to get there. Corviknight able to make an Air Cutter, and this is valuable chip damage onto the Fearow. In comes Ampharos. Ampharos does a back-to-back Brutal Swing is loaded. Brutal Swing would not take the knockout, but it would do quite a lot of damage. Fearow no shields. There's an aggressive pivot. In comes the Shadow Shiny Dewgong to catch the Drill Run. Drill Run will do a decent amount of damage. Ice Shard takes the knockout, and it all comes down to what the opponent has in the back as their final Pokemon. They're waiting down the timer. Timer hits 0. It's going to be the Qwilfish, and this is looking very good. Opponent tries for the catch. They don't get the catch. Full farm down from the Dewgong, and this game is over. Qwilfish can bait with an Aqua Tail. They can full set a Shadow Ball. It's not going to matter. Dewgong is doubled up on drill runs, and this is just going to be way too much damage. Qwilfish ends up no shielding. In comes Ampharos, sniping down with the Volt Switch, and that's the game 1 win. We move to game number 2, picking up a dominant lead win, Shadow Ampharos into Shadow Toucanon. Opponent safe switches into Gastrodon, answered with the Shadow Corviknight, but the opponent made an incredibly smart play. They didn't insta-pivot into the Gastrodon. Instead, they threw one peck and then switched. Not only did that transfer the Volt Switch damage onto the Gastrodon, but it also forced the Ampharos into an overtap, giving the Gastrodon a pretty big energy head start. Payback is going to land big damage onto the Gastrodon. Corviknight plays to a charge type priority tie that it does not win, and that's going to cost Corviknight its energy and a shield. That is a very rough turn of events. BZ could look to potentially try and pivot out when Toucanon gets brought back in here, just because there are 2 strong answers to Toucanon, but it looks like he's just going to stay in with the Corviknight and fire off this boosted Air Cutter. Boosted Air Cutter will still do a lot of damage onto Toucanon. Toucanon will put up the shield, and there's the aggressive pivot. In comes Ampharos. Ampharos might get one shot by the Beak Blast here, and it does! Beak Blast picks up the 1-hit KO. Beak Blast is just such a hilarious move. In comes Dewgong, and Toucanon will stay in to fire off Drill Peck. Drill Peck is going to be grabbing the final shield away from the Shadow Shiny Dewgong. In the back, it's Diggersby, and this game looks winnable. This is the Quick Attack Diggersby, which means they have slightly more fast attack pressure, but they're going to have worse pacing. Shadow Icy Wind does big damage, and that is a beautiful catch onto the Corviknight. Opponent just tried to throw the Scorching Sands as soon as they got it, and by not throwing on good timing, that was easily exploitable. Now back in comes the Dewgong, able to apply a second Icy Wind debuff onto the Diggersby. Diggersby will put up the Protect Shield, and the opponent's going to have to try to reset the debuff at some point, and they do. They send in Toucanon, bringing back in the Diggersby, but they lose charge type priority to the Dewgong. Icy Wind knocks out the Diggersby, and that's going to be a game 2 win. We move to game number 3, Shadow Ampharos. This game going to be greeted on the lead with a Primeape. Primeape, not a fun Pokemon for this entire team to see, but the Volt Switches will add up. Ampharos overfarms Primeape, threatening a close combat that would easily pick up the 1-hit KO, so Ampharos will put up the shield, but it's only going to be a Rage Fist. Ampharos waits the turn, baits with the Brutal Swing, so not looking to boost up the Volt Switch damage. Brutal Swing gets the shield, waits the turn, and then goes for a catch onto the Shadow Corviknight. Unfortunately, the Shadow Corviknight is still going to take quite a lot of damage from that Rage Fist. Primeape just going to stay in, outpace. Corviknight might get knocked out here. It's going to be very close. Corviknight no shields, Rage Fist lands. Corviknight barely able to hang on, 1 HP remaining, making the Air Cutter, knocking out the Primeape. But basically the entire Corviknight has been lost as in comes Drapion. Drapion, actually the non-Shadow Drapion, which is a bit of an interesting choice, as in comes the Shadow Shiny Dewgong. So the opponent is the regular Drapion, so they're bulkier, but this is the Shadow Dewgong, so it's going to output quite a bit more damage. The damage is probably going to be about what we normally expect from a Dewgong-Drapion matchup, since normally the Shadow status is flipped. Dewgong gonna have to put up a Protect Shield here. It cannot afford to let another Crunch land. Switch Timer has always been up for the opponent. Aggressive pivot into the Ampharos, and Ampharos will look to boost up its attack with the Trailblaze. Trailblaze will not knock out the Drapion, but it will put it lower. I don't think Aqua Tail will quite knock out here. I think the Crunch will be required. They go for the Crunch. Ampharos does get KO'd. Back in comes the Dewgong. In the back, it's Shadow for Alligator, and unfortunately, there was just never a chance in that one, so they're going to resign the match. Great lead in the next match. Shadow Ampharos into Empoleon. Opponent safe switches into a Wigglytuff, and I have to ask what a Wigglytuff is doing here post-Charm nerf. Now, Wigglytuff in previous seasons, its defensive typing and its dominant neutral matchups made it incredibly strong, but now that Charm damage has been reduced, Wigglytuff is a shell of its former self. If you ask it to win a neutral matchup, well, it kind of can't do that anymore. Wigglytuff can always hold its own to a certain extent in the Corviknight matchup, but Corviknight is just not going to get knocked out by this next Icy Wind, so Corviknight will still be able to maintain switch advantage. BZ will actually put up the shield. The opponent just goes for the Swift. So BZ going to value the health on the Corviknight just because it's going to be very difficult for the Empoleon to try and farm down. Corviknight going to be firing off the payback. This is a -1 payback. It's still going to do a lot of damage, and Empoleon actually puts up the shield. Can Empoleon get the full farm down here? No, it cannot. Shadow Corviknight refusing to get farmed down, able to make it to a second payback, and that damage is devastating. Aggressive pivot out into the Ampharos. Ampharos going to be answered with a Shadow Marowak. Opponent is running all kinds of nerfed Pokemon left and right. Brutal Swing is going to be shielded. There's the Trailblaze for the Ampharos right on cue, and this is going to be big damage onto the Marowak. So the opponent running the double nerf team, and unfortunately, it's not going to work out for them because they have lost this game. The Marowak is just simply too low. In comes the Dewgong. Dewgong can just shield up the Rock Slide. Oh, it ends up no shielding. This is a pretty big risk, but the opponent blind through a Bone Club, and luckily it's still going to work out. I was a little bit worried if the Shadow Rock Slide landed. Shadow Rock Slide plus Drill Peck could have KO'd, but it appears the opponent's just throwing all the wrong charge moves in this endgame. They threw a Bone Club followed by 2 Hydro Cannons into an Ice Water type, so they're 3 for 3 on incorrect charge moves. Luckily, it's not going to make a difference either way, but a little bit of a chaotic end to that game. We move to the next match. Oh, great lead. Shadow Ampharos into Fearow. Fearow's going to pivot out, safe switching into Licky. This team doesn't really have a hard check to Licky, so just going to stay in with the Ampharos and chip with the Brutal Swing. Brutal Swing chip, oh, actually gets shielded, and now in comes the Shadow Corviknight. Shadow Corviknight is going to take some pretty substantial damage from Shadow Ball. While Corviknight can dish out a lot more damage in his Shadow form, it also takes a lot more damage as well. But the good news is the Sand attacks are putting the Licky ever closer to a range where Shadow Payback could potentially take the knockout. Corviknight gonna overfarm, throwing 5 Sand attacks, hoping this Payback will be enough to take the KO. No shield comes out, Payback connects, but the opponent's able to save the Licky and send in Fearow. But it's bad news for the Fearow. Fearow was hoping the Energy Head Start would let it hit back against the Ampharos, but it's not the Ampharos that switches in. It's gonna be the Dewgong. They fired off the Drill Run, anticipating the Ampharos, but it was the Dewgong. Dewgong gonna shield up the Drill Peck. It looks like Dewgong, unfortunately, will not be able to get the farm down. So for Dewgong, honestly, it feels like this interaction ended up going in favor of Fearow, as Fearow was able to get big damage, pressure his shield, and force energy. In comes Shadow Kanto Ninetales. Opponent goes for the catch. No, they don't get the catch. I thought they got the catch, but they transferred the Ice Shard damage. The visuals went crazy there. That's some of the stuff I'm talking about with the new system. They have got to fix that. I know they're taking these next 2 months to try and get the new system in working order, but I do really wish that they had done so without turning all of the Great League into this system, because there's definitely a lot of issues they still have to work through. We move to the next match, picking up what I assume is a pretty rough lead matchup, Shadow Ampharos into Shadow Ninetales. Ninetales is just going to absolutely spam this Ampharos to death. That straight 8 pacing is so oppressive. Ninetales has dominant winning matchups into the back 2 Pokemon as well. Ampharos tries to overfarm. Ninetales makes a second Weather Ball that almost picks up the knockout, and to make it even worse, in comes a Shadow Jumpluff to absorb the Brutal Swing. So now, the Ampharos is basically out of the fight. There's still a 2-shield Kanto Ninetales. This is going to be a very difficult game to win. Shadow Jumpluff is not going to appreciate having the Shadow Corviknight switch locked onto it, but if the opponent saves 2 shields for the Shadow Kanto Ninetales, I don't really see a way that the Ninetales can ever be defeated. Air Cutter is going to be no shielded. That does a lot of damage, but not going to be enough to secure the knockout. That's going to force a second Air Cutter out of the Corviknight. Jumpluff will fall. Corviknight does get the attack boost. In comes the Ninetales. Boosted Sand attacks are shredding, getting the catch and sneak out of the Dewgong. But maybe it needed to be a CMP sack swap onto the Shadow Ampharos, because the Ampharos does have a move, but Dewgong is not going to get the farm down. Energy Ball is banked. In comes Malamar, and Malamar will outpace, and Dewgong needs this energy, so the final Protect Shield will be used. Unfortunately, there's just no path to victory at this point in the game. Malamar can absorb one Drill Run, shield the second, and the Malamar energy plus that loaded energy ball on the Ninetales means this game is over. Dewgong is going to fire off Drill Run number 2 at the Malamar. Malamar doesn't use a shield. What are they doing? They get farmed down. In comes the Ninetales. Ninetales gets farmed down as well. They had no lose con in the game unless they forgot to use a Protect Shield. Maybe they misremembered and thought the Ninetales was healthier than it was, but it was not. They get farmed down, and somehow that game ends in a win. We see a pretty familiar lead in the next match, Shadow Ampharos into Primeape. Ampharos respects the close combat, shields a Rage Fist bait, but Primeape's going to shield the Trailblaze in return. If this is just a Rage Fist, then I believe at +1 it will barely miss the knockout. Ampharos no shields, Ampharos barely able to hang on, and Ampharos will be able to win Switch Advantage or Shield Advantage. Opponent decides they're going to take Switch Advantage. Unfortunately, it's going to be a tough farm down. In comes Corviknight. Corviknight not able to get the farm down. This is a +2 Primeape, so Corviknight is forced to put up the shield. There's the close combat. In comes Mandibuzz. Mandibuzz is going to be answered with the Shadow Dewgong, and a bunch of energy was stored on the Corviknight for later in the game. This Mandibuzz is on Dark Pulse. Dark Pulse, not the recommended moveset for Mandibuzz. If you see Mandibuzz nowadays, it should always be on Foul Play plus Shadow Ball. Shadow Ball is just a significantly better move than Dark Pulse, and you really need Foul Play, as that's basically your bait move. Mandibuzz will go for another Dark Pulse. That's not going to be too much of a problem here. Dewgong going to try for the farm down, but he can't get the farm down. Mandibuzz too bulky. Dewgong forced to fire off the charge stack at the 1 HP Mandibuzz to secure the KO. In comes Primeape. That's going to fall. It's a Clodsire in the back. Clodsire going to be permanently debuffed for the remainder of this game. There's just no path forward for the opponent. There's no chance they can win. In comes the Shadow Corviknight. Corviknight makes the Shadow Payback. And even if they have Stone Edge, Stone Edge will not take the KO. Payback lands, opponent playing it out to the bitter end. They are refusing to quit. They will not leave the field. Stone Edge lands, Corviknight easily survives, Sand attacking down the Clodsire and taking the game. We move to the next match, Shadow Ampharos. What's it going to see this time? It's going to see a Wigglytuff. How is there a second Wigglytuff? I'm just at a complete loss. I don't know if I've seen more than like 1 or 2 Wigglytuffs this entire season, and we have 2 across the course of 10 games. Wigglytuff will put up an early shield. Ampharos, honestly in kind of an awkward spot here. Ampharos is going to shield back. Wigglytuff goes for a Swift, but Ampharos is always going to be able to make it to a second Trailblaze. This Trailblaze will guarantee Switch Advantage or Shield Advantage. The Wigglytuff ends up no shielding, and they lose the ones to Ampharos. In comes Talonflame. Talonflame can't get the farm down. Long-turn duration moves are so much worse on the new system. And granted, this is a team using a 4-turn move and a 3-turn move, which I would argue neither are particularly optimal. But man, it is tough out here for the Incinerate users. Talonflame lands the Brave Bird. In the back is Azumarill, and it looks like Azumarill is the right Pokemon that the opponent needed to have in the back to be able to win this game. Unless Shadow Corviknight starts boosting early and often, I really don't think there's going to be a way the Shadow Corviknight can take home this win. But with Air Cutter, you never know. Air Cutter lands onto the Azu, no boost comes through, and I think that might seal it. Corviknight getting lower and lower, the bubble damage really adding up, firing off another Air Cutter. Azumarill with the nose shield, the pivot into the Dewgong, trying for the catch and able to get it. Oh, it turns out it wasn't a catch. Azumarill went for the play rough. But there's still no path forward because Talonflame is not in Air Cutter range. If Shadow Air Cutter knocked out, maybe there's a chance, but it doesn't. That means the Incinerate lands. Even with finally getting the Air Cutter boost, it's just too little, too late. Shadow Corviknight ended up making this a lot closer than I thought, but Azumarill is just simply too bulky, and that game will end in defeat. Hopping into the final match. Oh, this time with Shadow Dewgong on the lead, and that turns out to be a very wise choice as it leads into Shadow Altaria. Immediate Seismitoad save switch from the opponent. I wonder if it's going to be Tinkaton in the back. I have seen that team a few times, typically with Empoleon or Tinkaton as the final Pokemon. Either way, Shadow Ampharos should do pretty well into any of those Pokemon. Seismitoad not going to have a particularly fun time going up against the Shadow Corviknight. Shadow Corviknight even at -1, I imagine the Shadow Payback has to take the knockout. Payback is going to be shielded as Seismitoad really looks to try and make a play for Switch Advantage. But even with Switch Advantage, I don't know how much that's going to do for them because the Dewgong energy should still be very strong. Opponent pivots out, there's the Empoleon, it's going to be answered with the Shadow Ampharos, and Ampharos now gets to absolutely shred through Empoleon with these Volt Switches. Ampharos puts up the shield as they go for the Hydro Cannon, gonna fire off the Trailblaze right before they're able to make their next Hydro, and this Trailblaze will be massive overkill, securing the knockout. The opponent's still in so much trouble in this match because there is so much energy stored on the Shadow Dewgong. Shadow Dewgong tanked an Earth Power earlier, saved an entire Icy Wind, and then pivoted out. And that is going to absolutely shred the Shadow Altaria momentarily. Seismitoad gets knocked out, in comes Shadow Altaria, there's the Dewgong right on cue. And yeah, this game is just over. Icy Wind is going to be shielded up. They can try for the farm down, but they're never going to get there. Double super effective Ice Shard shredding through the Shadow Altaria. Icy Wind picks up the knockout, and that's a good game. All in all, these were some very fun battles, so many thanks to BZPH for the battle submission. Now, Shadow Dewgong, does it bring Dewgong back? Is Dewgong back to top meta relevance? Well, honestly, I don't think so. Even with the new faster pace in a drill run, where it's straightforward a drill run, Dewgong's biggest sin is Ice Shard. Ice Shard used to be a top tier fast move, but as the seasons come and go and as the power level continues to climb in terms of how strong fast moves are, Ice Shard has gone from what used to be a very good fast move to honestly a pretty mediocre fast move. And so it really feels like Dewgong is held back in a lot of matchups just by virtue of the fact that Ice Shard is clunky, Ice Shard doesn't have amazing stats overall, so even though Dewgong as a Pokemon has terrific stats, it feels like its moveset does hold it back to a certain degree. Personally, I think as far as the Ice Water goes, I'm a big believer in Shadow Celio as the best Ice Water type. I think Lapras is also very, very strong. Lapras obviously has Psywave, which allows it to crush opposing water types, even if it's not running Skull Bash. So I don't think Shadow Dewgong is a terrible Pokemon per se. I think it's usable, and I imagine there'll probably be some limited meta in the future where it's useful to have one. But I do think that being an Ice Water type right now, it's a very, very crowded field. It's difficult to be an Ice Water type. There's so many water types in general, but the Ice Waters especially have gotten so many updates over the past few seasons. So even though Dewgong has been an absolute terror of the past, I don't think with the Shadow Edition, it's going to make a large impact on the meta. Now, one topic that I did briefly touch on during today's video that I did want to talk just a little bit more about at the end is how the duration of fast moves actually impacts their viability on the new system. Now, when the new system is a lot more stable and working a lot better, and we're no longer frustrated at all the glitches and weird stuff that's happening, I do plan on making a pretty extensive second channel video where I go over the mechanic changes from the old system to the new system and what you can expect. Now, I've wanted to make this video for a while, but while the new system is still really inconsistent, I don't feel like that makes quite a bit of sense. But one topic that is going to be discussed in that video will be the change to how damage registers. In the new system, damage always registers on the final turn. Whereas in the old system, Incinerate being a 5-turn move registered on turn 4, now it registers on turn 5. This means that longer turn duration fast moves like Incinerate, like let's say even like a 3-turn move like Charm or a 4-turn move like Volt Switch are now all substantially worse because you can't farm down as easily. It is a lot more difficult to try and farm something down because your damage lands later, so there's a greater chance for them to make like a last second charge attack or to bank energy and then pivot out and transfer the damage onto something else. So that's something you can keep in mind while team building for the new system. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is very much appreciated, so thank you guys so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.